So many of us are on social media and see it as a harmless distraction or a way to connect with our friends and family. But for those struggling with anxiety or depression, social media can cause more harm than good. Welcome back to another episode of the Mental Health Break. Today's episode features Amalya Tagakchyan, specializing in anxiety and depression. Amalya will help us better understand the mental health impact of social media. Hi, I'm Dr. Nafisa Sekandari, a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety-based disorders. It wasn't that long ago that I struggled with my own anxiety and had no idea how to manage it. But now I have control over my anxiety and overall mental health. I created the Mental Health Break podcast to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you do the same. Mental illness can cost you time and money. Ignoring your symptoms will only make the problems worse. Taking time out of your busy day to dedicate to improving your mental health can lead to long-term health and wellness. In this podcast, each week you'll learn tips, tricks, and proven strategies to help you regain control of your life, all while prioritizing your mental health. If you want to improve your life, regain control of your mental health, and feel empowered, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Today's episode is brought to you by my free upcoming masterclass, 3 Steps to Transforming Your Anxiety. Managing and controlling your anxiety is possible, and in this free course, I teach you how. Join me by visiting transforminganxiety.com/register. I'm so excited to talk to Amalya today. Before I bring her on, I want to take a minute to introduce her. Amalya Tagakchyan is a licensed clinical social worker practicing for close to 10 years. She has worked with various populations, including adults, children, families, and couples with various settings of outpatient, residential, school-based, and currently within a group private practice. Fluent in Armenian, Amalya has taken a special interest in supporting people through a multicultural lens in hopes to continue to break cultural barriers and stigma that surround mental health. She leans into an evidence-based practice in addition to talk therapy. She specializes in areas of anxiety, life transitions, stages of life, depression, grief, cultural challenges, relationships, and communication, primarily with the adult population. She's a graduate from the California State University, Northridge, with her bachelor's in psychology and master's in social work. She joined the Armenian American Mental Health Association this year in hopes to provide more mental health assistance to the community. So let me bring on Amalya. Here you are. Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So I just introduced you a little bit. Can you just share a little more about what got you interested in mental health and then your specializations, like I just shared? Can you tell us a little bit more about what interested you in anxiety and depression and also working within the Armenian community?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like from a very young age, I've just had a general curiosity of why people are the way they are, what makes somebody more motivated than somebody else, and then the component of mental health came into the picture. So as soon as I found out that you can help someone by having talk therapy, that led me to my master's degree. And I think I've always been drawn to the very intimate setting of being able to sit with somebody, provide a clinical lens, and be able to help and guide them. The cultural aspect comes in because I'm not going to generalize, but I think much like many cultures, it's not widely accepted. Mental health in general is still somewhat taboo. It's still pretty stigmatized. So in growing up, nobody really talked about what anxiety is, what depression is, what postpartum depression is. It wasn't this wildly shared topic. It was really just unspoken about. And I think a lot of that had to do with assimilation to the American culture and in addition to not having the education. So I saw this as an opportunity to be able to be somebody who can kind of absorb that, learn about it, and then help others, especially within my culture and other cultures that can kind of provide, like you share, the multicultural lens. And like specialty wise, why anxiety and depression and life stages and the cultural aspects of life come up, is because I feel like that is quite honestly the most prevalent. It's not to minimize any other mental health disorders, but I feel like everyone's kind of walking around anxious, and then sitting with that for so long ends up leading to an actual diagnosis of anything under the umbrella of anxiety.
Yeah, anxiety is the number one disorder in the world right now, and a lot of people are predicting that it's going to get so much worse because of this pandemic.
Right.
So I think it's the right area to focus on because it can affect every area of your life. And anxiety isn't just being nervous. Can you share a little bit about what you've seen in practice with how people exhibit anxiety? Because that is something that I'm passionate in as well.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, reducing the stigma of mental illness within our communities is really big. But share a little bit about what anxiety looks like and the people that you've worked with.
So I will 100% echo what you just said. I think it's sadly going to get worse before it gets better. And my hope is that people continuously seek out mental health services because they realize that this is it almost becomes this like natural part of life, especially with the pandemic exacerbating that. But I think when people often think about anxiety, like everyone across the board can utter the words, I'm nervous, I'm worried, I'm anxious. And that remains 100% to be true. Where that crosses the line into a actual mental health diagnosis, where, you and I are throwing ourselves into the diagnostic manual and looking to, do you meet the criteria for anxiety, and going through the diagnosing process, that's when it starts to become, okay, this is now something that is potentially debilitating and can be crippling. And much like most mental health disorders, is kind of what defines it is it's now interfering with your day-to-day life. So it goes from um, I'm worried about, let's say, like test anxiety is a big one. So I'm worried about this test that I'm going to take. So you think about it a little bit. You're nervous, maybe sweaty palms when you're holding pen to paper. But where the crosses over is you can't stop thinking about it. It now has interfered with your ability to eat, with your ability to sleep. It's now impaired your relationships. It is this persistent, pervasive, perpetual, ongoing worry and fear that crosses the line from I'm just anxious, which tends to be short term, it's reality based, to something that is diagnosable and is now something that could be based off of a perceived threat, not something that maybe you can necessarily pinpoint to something in reality. And now you're sitting with an actual diagnosis. And this typically happens, the most common one, generalized anxiety disorder, which at least within my practice, I feel like I'm constantly diagnosing my clients with that, is after it passes 6 months of being in this perpetual persistent state of worry and fear.
Definitely. What I'm finding is a lot of people have been struggling for the majority of their lives. I do feel there's a genetic component to it,
Mm-hmm.
and they might not realize it because when you feel in control in your life, you feel like, okay, I can handle this. And I do feel like there's a positive side of anxiety as well that kind of drives us and helps us to get things done. But a lot of people don't realize that was probably anxiety as well, but all of a sudden life circumstances happen that they're no longer in control, and then they feel overwhelmed by it all. As far as the connection, like we're talking about the effects of social media right now, and I'm finding myself this past week doom scrolling, I'm sure like
Mm-hmm.
everybody else, and there's been
Yes.
a lot happening. 2020 was a wake-up call for all of us, and so what have you noticed in terms of just the impact social media has had on mental health in general?
Yeah, this week, I mean, we were off to a 2021, a new year, off to a fresh start, so to speak. And then the sixth happened. And here we are, kind of going through the motions of what this feels like now. What are we worried about? So, like you mentioned with doom scrolling, it's not, it's potentially harmful, but you can't get yourself to stop. So you're seeing, let's say, one image of violence after another, and you, it sometimes subconsciously, don't know that it's impacting you and don't know the type of effects that it's having. But lo and behold, it's exacerbating anxiety. And now we're constantly in this state of worry and fear. And it can go from like a macro level, from, what's going to happen to our country, to, specifically speaking for this week, to, on a micro level, how it's impacting us individually. So now we're in this perpetual cycle of worry, and it came from images on our screen, images on our phones, on our iPads, on our laptop, even merely reading a tweet and internalizing that almost. And I was reading this article because I had done a recent post about it on my page, but the impact that it's had, according to some research, of how it can mimic vicarious trauma. And that's, when you're not directly exposed to something that could be classified under trauma, but you're witnessing any sort of graphic images or any sort of statements of violence, and now you're having similar um, symptoms to sitting with what feels like you just experienced trauma firsthand. And it has never become as easy. It's never been as easy as it is now, because we're all, again, I hate to generalize, but I feel like here we are talking about this very common topic. We're all glued to our phone. We simply can't detach from it. And that persistent cycle of scroll, 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 and then the impact that it has mentally, emotionally, and physically all happens so fast that, I mean, sometimes I don't even realize it. And suddenly I'm irritable, and suddenly I'm like short with the people around me, and I have no idea why, because I'm like, I'm fine, nothing's happened, I'm not stressed. But an hour ago, I just read through something that has now impacted me and influenced the rest of my day.
Exactly. I mean, I pride myself on not watching the news, but yet I am scrolling on social media. And even if I don't
Mm-hmm.
watch the news
Right.
on TV, I'm getting a lot of images sent through my social media. I'm getting a lot of videos that I might not have necessarily wanted to be exposed to. And like you said, we are at risk for being vicariously traumatized. I mean, this has been proven during the Iraq War. This has been proven during 9/11, that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people ended up having symptoms of postpartum depression, postpartum depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic stress
Yeah.
disorder, because they were just watching these images, and a lot of kids were exposed to TV images of the war and the gory scenes that they were seeing. And so, but now we're doing it through social
Mm.
media. What, for people that struggle with depression and anxiety, what symptoms should they be looking for? And then also, if you can touch on the addiction aspect of social media as well.
Yeah, let me start with your second question. So we'll start with breaking down dopamine for a second, because dopamine is our it's the reward center. It's the reward chemical in our brain, and it's similar to when we, let's say, take a bite of chocolate and we're immediately feeling the rewards of that. We are now experiencing almost the same thing when we get a, let's say, a like, or a thumbs up, or a comment, or a follow, and it now it echoes that same type of increase in dopamine, and now you're feeling that sense of reward, and now you're going back for more, and suddenly you're finding yourself like we mentioned before, like you can't let go of your phone, because it's this perpetual feeling of, I want to know what's going on, I just got to follow, let me see who it is. But then what happens with like the mental health aspect of it, what happens with the anxiety is, if for 1 second, and this is a term that, I mean, definitely not a clinical term, but one that everyone is familiar with, FOMO, of like the fear of missing out. So you don't check something immediately, a notification, and now comes the anxiety part of it, of where, did I miss something? Is there something I'm not a part of? And when we're looking at like the symptoms of it, so now you have these like racing thoughts of, is there something I missed out on? Is there something I'm not a part of? Merely because you didn't check immediately what your notification was. So we have this ongoing cycle of, okay, so now you're thinking about it. And then it's the only thing you can focus on. So now your inability to focus on anything else kicks in. Let's say you had tasks and lists and things to do, but the sheer idea of I need to see what so and so commented on a picture or whatever the case may be now becomes your primal focus for the day. It's all you can think about. It could potentially lead to feeling like almost like on edge, feeling irritable, feeling sad. And then what happens kind of in a case that we don't realize is it's incredibly isolating. If you didn't check that notification, if you didn't reply back, if you don't know what's going on for 15 minutes and you're used to knowing what's going on within like an hour, I mean, within like a minute, you now feel isolated from quote unquote all these social connections that you've made, which becomes this incredibly isolating process because you're now not in the quote unquote in the know. There's this fear of missing out. So it definitely can lead to a lot of sadness, a lot of isolation, a lot of irritability, lack of sleep, because why sleep when you can continuously be up to date on what's going on in either the world or your friend's life? Happens all the time, right?
That's a good point to bring up because I have patients that leave the TV on all night in case they miss something because
Wow.
they're so worried about something happening. And then on top of that, they sleep with their phones in the bed. And then they wake up in the middle of the night because they're so stressed, they're worried, and so they can't sleep. What do? They get back on that phone
Mm-hmm.
and start checking, and then they wonder why they're not getting sleep. And I'm so passionate about sleep because when you're not sleeping, you're going to be more reactive. Your anxiety will be worse.
Right.
And you won't be able to manage it as much. So it's it's that fear of missing out, like you said, like the likes that we're getting and the
Mm-hmm.
attention that we're getting online, but also just wanting to know 24 hours a day what's going on around the world. It gives us that sense of control, even though it's not
Mm-hmm.
reality. It's just an illusion of control. Even for people that aren't
Absolutely.
necessarily diagnosed with depression or anxiety, what suggestions do you have for these people in terms of what to look for, and then how do they monitor all that, considering how glued, like you said, we are to our phones?
I mean, if I mean, things to look at for like if you are maybe particularly like experiencing low frustration tolerance, so you're snapping at people, you're shorter at people, that level of irritability can be a result of not, not having been on social media as much, not getting enough sleep. And I will wholeheartedly agree with that. The lack of sleep contributes to our functioning and our well-being the rest of the day. It impacts our digestive system, it impacts our cognition, it impacts our functionality in general, like from physically to emotionally to mentally. So having noticing that you're getting, instead of the recommended 6 to 8 hours, you're getting 2 to 3, again because of that like fear of missing out. Really look out for you know how do you feel? Are you particularly like lethargic? How's your energy level? Or do you have the same energy level you did when you did get that 6 to 8 hours sleep and you spent maybe an hour on social media that day rather than 5 hours of screen time? And I think our phones make it really easy now, should you look at it, to be able to see how long you've spent on various apps on your phone. So one way, if you're starting to feel like I can't sleep, I can't eat, I'm sad, I'm feeling isolated, I'm irritable, I'm nervous all the time. Um, all of that increase of like the things like to look out for, just day in and day out of feeling this perpetual state of like worry and rigidity and being on edge, and like that inability to sleep, that your eating is impacted, your energy level is impacted, how you communicate is impacted, because again, like I said, it could oftentimes lead to that very like isolated feeling of I don't know I don't know how to feel, or I don't know how to sit with myself because I missed out on like X, Y, and Z. So if this is happening, I think it's kind of, it may seem like common sense, but really looking at reducing how long you're spending on like every social platform, looking at maybe how many social platforms. Is it just Facebook, or is it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and everything else, and then chatting with somebody about what happened? So it's constantly having this idea reinforced of, I need to be able to catch up on things. I need to be able to see things. Something else, and I think, this is definitely your area of expertise, but not having your phone in bed, like not having your phone close to you. And I know so many of us, myself included, use our phone as our alarm, but having an alternative for doing that. So it's not the first thing you're reaching for with like one eye open, barely awake, but you now have been triggered by an image, let's say, and you continue, and like that continues your doom scrolling, or you get a message and now that's the only thing you can focus on, and it derails the rest of your day of being able to accomplish, or be able to concentrate on anything else that you have to do, like your full-time job. So really being able to make these small changes of put your phone elsewhere to where you have to get up and walk to it if you're going to turn off the alarm, or not having it as the last thing you do at night, because even the and I'm not an expert in this, but even the light sensitivity and how that impacts you keeps you awake longer, from my understanding, and reading articles here and there. So even that impacts us. So making these small changes of setting really firm boundaries on, I'm not going to scroll for the last like 10 minutes prior to sleeping, and it's not going to be the first thing I do when I roll out of bed. Making these small changes could potentially help with decreasing some of those symptoms you may be experiencing as a result of it.
Yeah, perfectly said. I look at it like being disciplined with my diet. Like if I start the morning off with a muffin or a donut, I'm going to want more junk food the rest of the day. But if I start off with
Yeah.
protein and a healthy breakfast, then I'm more disciplined. I'm not easily
Right.
uh, craving things or falling victim to my cravings because I have more discipline and I'm more in
Mm-hmm.
control. I feel like it's the same thing when I start first thing in the morning, going directly
Yeah.
to my phone and checking social media. I'm going to be more. I'm going to want more, the same way that I want more sugar when I start my breakfast with sugar, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Yeah, and then also I'm noticing, like I said, I can be proud of the fact that I don't really watch the news, but then I'm like being blasted with
Mhm.
other people's posts on social media. It is seeping through me. I'm finding myself dreaming about it. I'm finding myself being more restless at night. I'm finding
Mhm.
myself having nightmares. So we're not even realizing how the stuff is affecting us and how it seeps in, and we're not consciously aware of it. So those are all the
Mhm.
negative things that related to social media, and I know we all could do better. For me, the phone has to be in the kitchen. I don't take my phone in the bedroom. I do have a battery operated little alarm
That's
clock that I
impressive.
use. Yeah, I just can't take it because the temptation is too great, and so I don't want to put
Absolutely.
myself through that. But I know there's also positive ways to use social media. I know for me, as a business owner, I want to use social media instead of just being on social media. So, is there
Mhm.
a way for the average person that might not necessarily use social media for business? How can they use it in a way that's responsible? And can limits be set?
I think I mean, I feel like it's the constant struggle for most people, because, and social platforms know what they're doing to have this engagement take place where everything is very alluring and everything feels very time sensitive. So I think it is a matter of kind of what you said, like if you can find a realistic way to be disciplined with your diet, or with your like exercise regime, like if you, same rules apply to social media, and it doesn't feel that way just because it's so readily accessible, but being able to implement those same type of rules, really to enforce it and create habits. And I think that's the thing. It takes us so long to be able to build these very solid habits. So if you can start off small. So, if you, let's say you're not somebody who can put your phone, like you absolutely need the alarm to be on your phone, so it's not something that you're willing to sacrifice, then alternate that with, or rather like make the sacrifice at, during bedtime. So if you can create a routine for, instead of the last thing I do right before my head hits the pillow, or even like while your head is on the pillow, to scroll, get the updates, be stimulated, be triggered. And instead of doing that, maybe pick up a journal, maybe write down the thoughts of like how you felt that day. Maybe it's drinking tea right prior to sleeping. So replacing something that is actually beneficial for you. And again, I know it's easier said than done, because like pouring tea takes effort and journaling takes effort, whereas scrolling is kind of like mindless and easy. But that all kind of falls back to, we need to do something because it is having a very severe impact on our overall well-being, mental health, especially because more often than not, we don't realize it. So if you can take that small step, just one thing, one small, tangible, feasible goal that you can set up of 10 minutes before sleeping, I'm not going to look, instead I'm going to journal, or meditate for 5 minutes, which is absolutely, like, research upon research can tell you how beneficial it is for you. You now have a better chance of not only getting a full night's sleep, decreasing your ability to sleep, decreasing the amount of restlessness, and even hopefully eliminating any sort of like nightmares that can come from it. Because I think since the pandemic started, more and more people reported just how many nightmares they're having out of fear of having the virus and what the implications of that look like. So really, I feel like it's a matter of being honest with yourself and starting small. Do one thing. Don't do five things. Just do one thing. And perhaps, if you're listening, the education part of it too, of how severe the impact really is without us knowing. So take on a preventative measure rather than it's too late and now I need to figure out how to fix this type of measure.
Yeah, you did mention the dopamine hit that we get from being on social media,
Mhm.
and that's the same receptor that gets activated and triggered when we are using substances and the drug addiction, right? When you do
Right.
cocaine, for example, your dopamine levels go sky high, and then you're constantly chasing that high because the normal levels of dopamine we have
Mhm.
is no longer sufficient. But for some
Yep.
people, I mean, they've done studies where they've gotten rid of all social media for a week. And in the first couple of days, people are going through withdrawals. And especially kids, they're
Mhm.
having a really hard time not knowing what to do with themselves. Can you talk a little bit about the addiction being similar to substance abuse? And are the treatments similar?
Yeah, I mean, as far as treatments being similar, I'm not sure, because when somebody thinks of something like you brought up, like cocaine, it is, I think it's fair to say it is absolutely addictive. And once the addiction takes place, that is, reason why rehab treatment centers exist. That is reason why, 12-step programs exist. There's a numerous amount of assistance out there, because it is a very real addiction. It is extremely common. So when we're looking at that, and we're doing like brain scans, and we're looking at how the neurotransmitter dopamine impacts our like reward center, which creates that sense of that cycle of, I want that reward, I want that pleasure, I want that addiction. Then we look at social media, and again, it's like, I get that one like, and now I want that second like, now I want that third like. And you're not sleeping because you can't wait to see how many likes this like one post or picture or whatever it has got you. So that's where the addiction starts of, I'm not going to sleep because I need to see, or if that like one person is ever going to comment on your picture that you just posted. So it becomes very much like this same type of like cocaine response almost. And I know it seems like such a hyperbolic example, but it's very, very true, of the same type of, because your brain doesn't know the difference. It's getting what it needs, it's skyrocketing through the roof. So then we have to work on ways to like wean it off. And then you experience that same type of withdrawal symptoms, like you mentioned, like not having it for a week. You're like, first couple of days, you're uncertain how to even function, but which makes it even more critical. And the reason really that we're chatting today is, this is very real. It's very problematic. We should take steps to have the preventative measures take place before it gets worse. And it feels like the only thing we can do is walk around incapable of upholding like our other responsibilities, and all we're capable of doing is being glued to our phones all day long. It really starts to have this strong impact. I think some people even see it as like a security blanket. If you don't have your phone on you, something's missing. You like I've heard people say like you almost feel like naked when you don't have your phone on you. It's become such an important part of your identity that once it's gone missing, you kind of don't even know how to function. Like I'm sure you could attest to this, like when people go to restaurants or well, pre-COVID, but when people go to restaurants or you're somewhere where maybe you don't know a lot of people, what's the first thing you do? You reach for your phone, you start scrolling. It's not your security blanket. So it makes it even kind of harder to let go of this habit that we've built of being addicted to our phones and addicted to social media. But again, if you're listening and you're taking anything away from this, is it impacts us before we even know it. So to be able to look out for what your energy level looks like and what your mood looks like, what your relationships look like, are they being impaired by the fact that it's become such a difficulty for you to not be on social media as a result?
Yeah, definitely. I know you mentioned a couple of things as far as that we can do before bed, like maybe meditation or journaling or even reading a
Mhm.
book. I don't even like
Yeah.
digital books. I like the actual physical book that I
Mhm.
can read before bed. So, what are some suggestions? Not just, I mean, you can say add more for before bed, but also what are some things that we can do during the day to um, structure our time better and not be so connected the entire day.
Mhm.
Just whatever suggestions that either you've helped your patients with or some suggestions that you can help the audience with.
I think the fact that a majority, not everyone certainly, but a majority of people are home right now gives us a lot more idle time. So we have somewhat lost our sense of structure and routine. And I know, we're becoming accustomed to the quote unquote new norm. So with that, we're trying to adapt and assimilate to what our days look like. More clients than ever have been reporting that they're working now more than ever because there doesn't seem to be a beginning and an end to their workday. Whereas when they used to drive to work and come back home, there was a very definitive, I'm done with my day. I can now engage with my family or pick up that book that I've been waiting to read, so on and so forth. So I think something that could be helpful in being able to address it during the day is by creating a sense of structure that you can abide by. And again, I know it's difficult, and myself also, I'm going to group myself into this. It does become a little bit easier to fall into these maladaptive habits that increase our anxiety by being on social media so much. But if you can plan out your day to where it feels like, maybe what it used to feel like at work, maybe you didn't have as much time to be on your phone because your attention was required to be engaged in, let's say, a meeting, or engaged in, if you're, let's say like professors, like now, like one of my friends specifically, she's teaching via Zoom. Before, she had to completely be away from her phone and kind of look at it until the end of the day. But now she has to be on screen and she's replying to things that, students are asking her on her phone. So it almost becomes impossible to detach ourselves from it. But again, like being able to have a sense of creating some sort of structure, creating some sort of routine to where it's 6 p.m. Now you're off work. Now you could decompress. And if for you, decompressing is, I just want to hop on my phone and catch up with things that are happening in the news, or catch up with how my friends or family are doing, then do that, rather than, let's say you're going meeting to meeting, 10 a.m. to 12, and then 1 p.m. to 2, you've now just used that one break that you had that potentially could have been used for, nourishing your body with good food, with healthy food, or, let's say even calling a family member to connect with them in a way that's, a little bit healthier. But now you're finding yourself scrolling for an hour. So back to what we talked about before, try to have a semblance of a structure and a routine that doesn't hinge completely on your ability to scroll. It's far too accessible. So decreasing that accessibility and replacing it with something that's healthier. If, let's say, you happen to have a meeting get canceled, instead of being on the phone for 2 hours, maybe try that meditation, that exercise that you've been wanting to do, especially since we've entered a new year. We're all kind of hoping to get into this cycle of new habits and bettering ourselves. So instead of, mindlessly scrolling, potentially doom scrolling, being able to, let's say, go out for a walk, even, I think we're, for those of us who live in areas that are getting maybe more vitamin D than not, like, you can go outside for that small window of time, go for a 5-10 minute walk. That is going to be a lot more beneficial than looking at pictures of what it looks like outside and not walking, and instead you're on your couch looking at what it looks like outside. So really being able to implement and structure your days in a way where it's not as accessible, and you're replacing the habit of scrolling with something that is actually good for you.
You brought up a good point, and that we're looking at other people's lives and looking at all the
Mm-hmm.
fun places they've been, and look at their stories on their walk in the sunshine or the beach.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't do that ourselves. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns I have with social media is we're constantly comparing our unedited life to somebody else's
Right.
perfected, filtered life. And so we feel like we're missing out. Our life is so boring compared to that. And
Right.
we just don't feel like we have any value to our lives because of what we're consuming passively, not realizing how that's shaping our perception about the world, about
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, about our lives. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because I think a lot of us, whether we're young or old, I mean, we're all exposed to this, especially if we're wanting that Instagram life and we don't have it, we're
Mm-hmm.
going to feel anxious and depressed.
Yeah, I mean, how easy is it to um, feel completely inadequate to somebody else by a simple decision of what filter they used? It's so devastating to see, especially with between the ages of, let's say, like preteen to young to like early 20s, just like the most impressionable ages, that of course you want the glamorous life that your friend is leading. Like, of course you want that type of day that they're having where they got to eat at a certain restaurant. Again, these are like pre-COVID examples, but quite honestly, even being able to have a backyard has been a luxury. So you're seeing all these like glamorous backyard photo shoots. And of course, it's going to start instilling this feeling of, why doesn't my life look like that? So now you're sitting with this level of insecurity, this level of dissatisfaction. And now all you're doing is looking at what you don't have, focusing on that, feeling sad, feeling inadequate, feeling potentially increasing your anxiety of constantly being worried about, how could I get myself to lead a type of life that they're leading? Because slap on a filter and suddenly your skin looks fantastic. Slap on a filter and suddenly you look like you woke up out of bed looking like you have like professional makeup on. And it's so easy to get sucked into this like image of what this like filtered life looks like. But of course, and I think we all know this, you take away those filters, you take away like all the behind the scenes things that took place prior to getting that one good photo that you saw. But no one really realized that, because we're all too susceptible to the instant gratification of, I'm going to see what I see, internalize that, and now you're sitting with all of these thoughts of, again, really feeling a complete dissatisfaction and potentially even like insecure about, why can't I do the things that X, Y, and Z are doing? Why can't my life look like that? And now here we are again, looking at like feeling isolated as a result of, my living room doesn't look like that. I don't own X, Y, and Z items, and now I feel less than as a result. That's 100% going to begin to correlate with feelings of sadness and could potentially lead to depression. And again, isolation is such a big part of that. Um, so instead of it being something that could potentially be inspiring or motivating of things to like aspire to, what especially when it's somebody we know, and again, this is twofold for anyone through those like really impressionable years. It becomes this black hole of I'm going to continuously compare myself. My FOMO is going to go through the roof because I'm not where they are. I don't have what they have. It becomes no surprise why this platform that's supposed to make us feel connected, and have like this sense of human quality and human interaction becomes this like measuring tool of, is your life as good as this person's life, which is just it could just be so damaging to someone's self-esteem.
It's very dangerous. I just recently read that a lot of people are asking for plastic surgeons to give them their filtered images. So,
Wow.
Snapchat has all these amazing filters. We all look
Yeah.
great on them. And
Yep.
so people are taking those images and saying, I want to look like this now. But I've
Oh.
also seen a lot of my patients, their marriages are falling apart because they're so busy posting content on social media and creating this
Mm,
filtered perfect life that they're not there for their families. They're not there for their kids. They're
yeah.
constantly feeding the beast because the algorithms will punish them if they're not constantly
Mm,
posting and they're not constantly creating new content. And so that's where the addiction can come too, especially if you are using it for business, and you're
mm,
getting recognition and you're becoming like a mini celebrity. So people are getting hooked
right.
on that as well. So that is very dangerous. Like you said, there are people that feel so much less than because their life doesn't look like that, and then people are going under the knife to make themselves look like this filtered image that no
Yeah.
human can possibly look like without those
Right.
filters, right? But
Right.
also, the scary thing is the high rise of suicide rates because people just don't feel like it's enough. Like, wow, what am I living for? I can never compete with so and so that's putting up
Right.
this wonderful image, but you have no idea what they're doing behind the scenes. You don't know how bad their life is.
Exactly.
Um, have you experienced any of that in
Exactly.
practice?
Yeah, no
Seeing
one
that?
takes Oh, absolutely. I mean, no one takes the time to ask you what your day was like, or did you have a fight with, your husband or wife? Did you have were your was your child screaming bloody murder prior to that like adorable picture of you and your kiddo, all smiles and perfectly like dressed to the T? And I think this happened a lot around the holidays where everything looked so prim and proper and everyone had their mini photo shoots at home, but you have no idea what happened behind the scenes of like, you know, could their child be potentially struggling with a mental health disorder themselves, but all you're seeing is this really adorable picture by the tree. Like, well, look at what a happy child that is. Look at what a wonderful life they're giving them. They're able to get a tree and so on and so forth. So automatically those thoughts of comparison, those thoughts of inadequacy, those thoughts of dissatisfaction come up where it no one's going to pause to ask the questions of what happened behind the scenes, because again, we as human beings want the instant gratification. We see what we see on the surface level, and unless this is like a close family or a close friend of yours where you do know the ins and outs of what struggles they're going through, no one's going to broadcast that. There isn't anything sexy about somebody's challenges, but there's definitely something attractive about like the mini vacation that they got to go on before the lockdown. Like all of these play a factor into how it impacts our mental health and our well-being. And another thing too, where we're already all so isolated as it is due to the pandemic. Here we are 2021, but we're still at home. Majority of us are still working from home. We still can't, unless it's an essential business, we still can't go places. So all of these things that used to bring us joy are already removed. We're all already feeling so isolated. So when you see somebody who is living this life that looks nothing like yours, or maybe isn't potentially abiding by the rules and isn't as safe as you are, and here you are trying to abide by all the rules and remain like, you know, adhere to all the regulations, but here is somebody who is not doing that, and is finding loopholes and is finding shortcuts, of course you're going to feel this like twofold sense of isolation and feel terrible about yourself. Like, why can they do the things that I'm not allowed to do, or that I thought I'm not allowed to do? So it becomes this like terrible, damaging cycle to our psyche and to our self-esteem and to our self-worth. So it really digs deep, and it happens so fast that we don't even realize what's happening. So I mean, I'm so appreciative that this is the topic that we're talking about, because I don't know a single person who isn't impacted by the effects of social media.
You're right. I mean, my daughter was just recently getting really angry with everything getting locked down again, and then seeing certain family members or friends just posting about how they're constantly going to restaurants and constantly doing things they're not supposed to. And then she's like, we're sitting here following the rules, not doing anything. Our life has basically been put on pause, but everybody else is having their parties and their vacations, and it feels unfair. And posting that is actually affecting people's relationships and creating a lot of anger and rage. But my biggest lesson was following this one huge social media celebrity, and just falling in love with her family and the pictures that she was posting and how happy they looked, and how her and her husband had this podcast every week that they would sit here and talk about how great their marriage is. And he writes a book, she writes a book, they make a ton of money. And then a couple of weeks later, they announce, we're splitting up, we're no longer compatible. And it's just like, what? And social media lost it. They were so angry at them for fooling us. And we're all victim to all this, because we're so used to following celebrities and thinking that their lives are so much more perfect than ours. And then we hear about how no, it never was. Either they commit suicide or they go through multiple divorces, and they're constantly feeding the beast, and we have no idea what toll that's taking on their lives. And it's so important for us to remind ourselves regularly that what we're seeing isn't always what is what the reality is, right?
Yeah, we're only going to see the highlight reel. Again, there's nothing attractive about seeing somebody's struggle, about seeing somebody like prime example, since you brought up kind of like following a celebrity couple, when the news came out about Kim and Kanye and them potentially, coming out of like hiding. They've been kind of, I feel like, under wraps for a little bit off the grid, and then they're back on the grid, and things are leading to divorce. Well, we have no idea, let's say, how long they've spent in couples therapy trying to work on everything, or the fact that he has a very real mental health diagnosis, but no one really wants to talk about that. It's more so the glamorous parts of like, I wonder how much money is going to be split between the two, and who's going to get what, and how are their kids. And so, like, no one's asking the big questions, and no one knows how hard these two have tried. My guess, just in seeing couples in couples therapy, watching the work they do in a 50-minute session once a week with me, let alone when they're off the grid, their entire life is in front of the camera. Who knows what they've done? But all we see suddenly is a picture of what they used to look like, and now they're angry, and everyone's talking about their fiscal matters, and no one has a clue about what happened behind the scenes. All we're going to constantly see is the glamorized full set of makeup, full team of wardrobe, and that's all we're going to get, and that's all we're going to focus on.
Exactly. But at the same time, I mean, I've been addicted to The Crown recently, and watching everything about watching that, and then watching everything about the Windsors. I feel like it's because it's like a longitudinal study for me. Like, it's a real good classic, like, like you see where the king was, and then the grandkids and how it's affecting them. But like, when you hear when we were so used to watching celebrities, like even Princess Diana, it's like, oh, people didn't really have any sympathy for her, because they're like, well, she's using the media to further her own cause, and she's benefiting from all the attention. And so, as devastating as her death was, it's just a lot of people just chalked it up to, well, this is what you get for kind of putting yourself out there. But unfortunately now, regular people like you and me are caught up in that kind of speculation. We're putting our lives out there, and we're creating the sense of this image of celebrity in other people's minds, even though we're not at that level by any means. But we're opening up our lives for being criticized, for being judged, for the negative comments, for being held up to a different standard. Just any thoughts you have on that, because I just feel like that's a very dangerous area that we're all heading into without really realizing what we're doing.
So I started my therapy page not too long ago, and it's a little mental health page with the intention of helping others and bringing mental health to the forefront, removing the stigma, really just normalizing mental health. And then in kind of like going through the motions of it, seeing when, let's say, somebody, and you can't help but do this when you're just starting out, and again, when you kind of have the intention of like, I just want to help people and connect and so on and so forth, and bring mental health to the forefront to educate others. Really watching like when somebody does and doesn't support you, when somebody does and doesn't like something or doesn't like something. If you pay too much attention to that, it could be potentially damaging, because you're suddenly getting your validation from outside sources, from complete strangers, from people that you don't know. And if you're doing anything like running a podcast, having a Twitter page, having a Facebook page, creating anything that is going to invite a sense like unsolicited opinions, which when you are public, and like you said, like you and I, especially in the mental health field, which isn't this like glamorous thing to begin with, but it is still something where you're putting yourself out there. You're going to have opinions, again, especially the unsolicited ones. And if that becomes the focal point of what do people think of me, how many supporters, quote unquote followers do I have, how many likes do I have on something compared to what I had the other day, and then even putting your face out there, you're constantly going to get either the approval or the disapproval. And if that becomes the centralized focal point of who you are, your identity, your well-being, your worth, if you let that become the only thing that defines you, absolutely, it is going to damage your well-being and make it more, you're going to be more vulnerable to any sort of mental health issues that come up, and anxiety and depression just being the two of those.
Well, we lose sense of reality. I used to have a friend that started out just putting herself out there, and she's very talented. She's great at what she does. But I remember this was 10 years ago. I remember telling her, I was like, you really need to stop putting private pictures of your husband and of your life. And she was putting all these bikini shots, and she's like, I know what I'm doing. And I guess she did know what she was doing, because now she has over 2 million followers, and she's made a ton of money. And it's like, so a lot of people are now feeling like they're competing with that. You and I mean, we're in the mental health field. I'm putting out only information related to how I can help other people. I'm very careful about not sharing too much about my own family and being very protective of personal information. But I know other people in similar situations that drag their husbands in, drag their kids in, and want to really show, because all of those get more likes. They get more engagement. You want to show that cute little picture of your kid. You want to, and this one person I was telling you about, she started showing pictures of her daughter twerking, and she was like 3 or 4. And it just broke my heart that, yeah, that's going to give you a lot of likes and a lot of people are going to watch it, but so will me walking down the street naked. But I don't want to do that, right? I mean,
Right.
you gotta kind of retain some dignity, but I feel like that's being lost because of what gets the clicks, what gets the likes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, you're putting out there what is attractive and sexy, and when it's not that, it's not going to get shared. And when it doesn't get shared, you're kind of questioning your purpose of what you're even doing. So, I mean, for that reason, exactly, I'm very private on my professional page for that reason, that it's intended to be a professional page. There are people who share and humanize their page with bringing their family into it, bringing their spouse into it. So that's all fine. But again, having this like sense of where are you kind of drawing the line of what's your intention, and if that is your intention, that's that's your discretion. But what ends up happening, and the dangers of that, is how much of that are you exposing, and then the comments that you get, especially when you're putting your children out there. That's if some mama bear and papa bear is going to come out ready to protect your kids when you see comments about them that you don't necessarily like. And then what's going to happen when you're sitting with that level of rage and anger? Are you going to take that out on your kid? You're probably going to take that out on the person who is closest to you, probably your family members. So this like cycle that happens that you don't even realize of, I don't like what I just saw. Now I'm angry. Now I'm anxious. Now I'm frustrated. What am I going to do with that? Unless you have like amazing coping skills, chances are it's going to hurt you in some way, and to like some degree. It doesn't always have to be severe, but on some level, it's going to be damaging to you, especially when it's about your kid.
Exactly. I just feel like we need to, I'm sure this conversation can go on for a long time because there's so many angles and directions I could go with this. And it's such a concern. It's such an issue. I mean, I have a 15-year-old and I'm concerned about what role modeling I'm doing for her and how she's going to use social media in the future. So it's really important for us to be mindful and be more mindful and intentional about what we're putting out there, what we're exposing ourselves to, and just setting limits. Create that time to just shut everything off and go off, take a hike, go take a nice long walk, be outside in the sunshine, be mindful, look at the trees, look at the little birds, and just bring yourself back in your body instead of constantly wondering, I wonder who posted, or I wonder how many likes I have. Because we know it's not just about how many likes we get, but social media companies are manipulating us by withholding the likes and making us constantly check and log in just so that we were constantly using their platform. And they release it at their discretion to give us that dopamine hit when they realize that we need it. So just being more mindful, it's super important. And I really appreciate you joining me today and having this discussion, because I feel like it's a conversation we need to continue to have.
Absolutely. And I think you used the perfect word of being really intentional. So if your intention is, defined a certain way, lead with that, and do it in a way where it's not going to be potentially harmful to you, your well-being, and your mental health.
Exactly. So tell us where people can find you now that I know you're on social media, but I know we're talking about social media, and I know you're out there trying to educate and reduce the stigma. So where can people find you and reach you if they need to?
So I'm currently within a group private practice. You could reach me via email, and I can include that later, or you can find me on Instagram and message me. I'm pretty responsive. It's Amalya Talks Therapy, and there's a underscore between each word. It's Amalya underscore talks underscore therapy. You can find me there. I try to stay actively posting content, again, for psychoeducational purposes. It definitely does not substitute for therapy by any means. It is, Instagram is definitely not therapy, but I can be contacted through my messages. And hopefully, there's some content there that could be beneficial for kind of any area of mental health.
Yeah, I don't think you need to share your email address, just the social media as if they wanted to follow you and they wanted to learn more about your work and the content that you're sharing. But I will link all of that in the show notes of this podcast as well. So if they need to find you, but I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate you taking the time and being here and joining us and adding to this very important discussion.
Yeah, thank you. It's honestly, it's my pleasure. I was really excited to do this, and I think it's a crucial topic that every single person can relate to. So thank you so much for having me as your guest.
I could have spent several more hours talking to Amalya about how social media is, in several important ways, negatively impacting our lives. Right after the recording of this interview, I read an article about Zoom dysmorphia leading to record numbers of plastic surgery. Zoom dysmorphia, similar to body dysmorphia, is where people obsessively focus on their body appearance, and this is resulting in a rise in plastic surgery. Now more than ever, it's important for us to be more mindful and intentional about our social media consumption. Make sure to regularly take time away from social media and give your mind and body a break from it. This will help you out mentally as well as physically. If you're interested in taking a break from social media, I have a great free download for you. It's my 25 internet-free activity guide for teens. It has great alternative ideas for teens and adults that are not internet dependent. Sometimes we just need reminders that there was a world without the internet at one point, and we managed to still have fun. To download your free guide, visit transforminganxiety.com/teens. I'll also include Amalya's information in the show notes, so go to drsekandari.com/episode 4 to get that information. Also, go ahead and leave me a comment and let me know your thoughts about this episode. If you haven't already, you can show support for the Mental Health Break podcast by subscribing wherever you're tuning in from today. We have some great interviews lined up, and you don't want to miss a single episode. Subscribe today so you get notified when new episodes drop. I can't wait to see you here next week. Same time, same place. Bye for now.